A warrior has to be an artist and a musician and a poet and, you know, all these other things as well, because if you're not, then you can be entirely consumed with one thing.
Dan the Outlaw Hardy!
I was in an industry which was all consuming. The focus was to basically make myself better so I could be outwardly destructive. My job was basically to take other people apart. I'm skilled and I'm trained in breaking humans. Now that, although it's kind of cool and it appeals to my 20-year-old ego, it's not a good contribution to the planet.
It's almost like you've been training your whole life to be this super analyst.
I see things that maybe other people don't. If I can communicate that, then that's going to help knowledge of the sport grow, that awareness of the sport grow. The whole bravado of no one can beat me, I never really had that. And I like that talk. Again, we're going back to Conor McGregor. It suits him. It just didn't work for me though. I'm far more honest with myself and with everybody else. I was watching back my fight with Condit. I threw the same punch 3 times in a row. It was absolutely stupid. It was a schoolboy error. I remember running down the River Trent, pulling my coach on his BMX, hitting bags with no gloves until my knuckles bled. We didn't really know what we were doing. That was like so counterproductive. And now I think the physical foundation of the sport is much more equipped to prepare somebody for a high-level fight. Any kind of controlled movement is a beautiful thing to watch.
If George St. Pierre doesn't have to come back, why does Dan Hardy have to come back?
He doesn't. Dan Hardy doesn't have to come back, but he wants to.
London Real has always been defined by a specific number of guests that have come on and had conversations, and one of them is Mr. Dan Hardy, who we have back on the show again. And he is really the man that pushed me to take this show to the next level, and I'll always be indebted to Dan for many reasons, but really it was his episode, I think almost 2 years ago, that really caused me to push up our production and go to a single camera, single person format. And it really was the evolution of what you see now, which is a beautiful set and many more cameras and a whole different look. But it all started with Dan, so I'll always be indebted. And also, Dan taught me that it was really not only okay, but necessary, you know, to be open and talk about what's real about him, and even more specifically about his history with psychedelics. He spoke about this last time I was here when he was on the edge of signing a deal to be the face of broadcasting for the UFC here in the UK for BT Sport. And I was shocked at the time because afterwards I said, Dan, you're about to close this deal where you're basically a sportscaster and you're being open and talking about your experience, you know, with the spirit world. And he said, Brian, and I'll never forget this, he said, I've found that the more honest I am in my life, the better people I attract to me and the better my life is. And I think that really hit me on a deep unconscious level, and I think I've changed the way I live my life today because of that conversation I had with Dan. And he's gone on to really change his game. He is now, in my opinion, probably one of the greatest when it comes to breaking down mixed martial arts fights, the nuances. I've watched his videos recently of Ronda Rousey and Conor McGregor, and Dan shows me things I don't see, and I am an aficionado of the sport. And he's really changed his game, and he's really reinvented himself, because a lot of fighters don't know what to do when they can't beat someone's head in anymore or kick him in the face like Dan used to do. But Dan has really transformed, and he's a man who's constantly on a spiritual journey. And after the next UFC event here in London, he's going back to Peru, to go back and see Mother Ayahuasca, and I respect him for doing that. And he really is a man at the forefront of just being himself and genuine to who he is, and really an example to the rest of us and how we can live our lives. And so I really enjoyed our conversation with Dan. It's a nice long one, and we really got into it. And I like listening to Dan. I like hearing him talk, and I like seeing him transform. So fantastic time with him, and I know you're gonna really look forward to this. And hopefully you might even get a taste for the UFC and MMA and some of those other exciting things happening. You know, a lot of you have said to me, Brian, what is the story with this Academy? Well, I wouldn't say it's like Fight Club, but it's like a secret organization of the hardest core London reelers from around the world, and we get together in our own private online community and we push ourselves to achieve our goals, to upgrade our peer groups, build better versions of who we are, and we hold each other accountable, and I think that's missing in this world today. A lot of people get likes and they get first place for doing nothing, and they're not being told when they're not getting something done, and we come with love, but we also come to really push you because we can all be better versions of themselves. And a lot of my mentors have pushed me to get where I am now, and I know I need to get further. And the Academy, it has online communities. We have Academy coursework. We have private classes. We have webinars. We have focus groups here in London where you can come to the studio, sit in the leather chairs. We stream those out to our private members communities. We have accountability buddies. It goes on and on and on, and it's amazing. And I put together a little video about it, and you can check it out right now.
The entrepreneurial journey, it can be a lonely road. I push myself in so many areas, but you know, you can't do it all yourself.
The thing about the Academy is it's like, look, you have the ideas, you have the ability, you have the skill, and you have the sort of ambition for yourself. But when you have a group of people pulling you forward, it's so important.
Accountability is what's missing from most of the programs or any gurus or any internet mentor that I had before.
I wanted to get some accountability. I wanted to make myself accountable to a group, to you.
The reason we started the Academy is because I felt like we were doing these amazing talks, like we'd have a Peter Sage episode or a Dan Pena episode or a Kala or someone, and you get super inspired, and then YouTube stops, and then you go back to your life and you don't make any changes. And it was just like, it felt like, what are we doing? If you're designing your life right, the good times are now. And in a few years, you'll look back and say, wow, that was amazing.
The thing about the Academy is it has so many different sort of layers to it. I think your web seminars are awesome. The way you broke it down and the style of your teaching is pretty awesome.
I like the feed. When I have to motivate myself, I kind of look at others struggling and getting over those struggles. So I actually follow daily the feed.
Best feature would be the sort of Facebook aspect of it, the social media aspect of it, as in creating a profile with your goals, your dreams.
So everyone's on the same vibe, and we may be at different stages in our journeys, but everyone's on the same page at the end of the day. Everyone's really trying to push themselves and building the best you. It really resonates with me.
And the fact that I'm committing a small amount of money and the fact that I'm actually trying to interact with those people means that I'm invested and means that I will keep it for the long run.
You have to be serious about yourself and what you want to achieve. And if you're serious about yourself, this is going to be such a fantastic platform.
London Real, sponsored by Bulletproof. This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Dan the Outlaw Hardy, a mixed martial artist and UFC world title challenger and now television commentator for the UFC. Earlier this year, you were part of Team GB in the first leg of the Clipper Round the World Yacht Race, covering 5,300 miles from London to Rio de Janeiro. You are one of our most popular guests ever on London Real, in part because of your outspoken views and openness discussing ayahuasca and other psychedelics. Dan, welcome back to London Real.
Thank you. It's good to be here again.
It's good to have you back. It's been like almost 2.5 years.
Crazy.
It's crazy because those episodes are kind of like little diary entries like from our lives. And there's one thing I just wanted to thank you for, because we stepped our game up in a big way for your episode. And before that, we were like the old split screen, like early Joe Rogan days. And like for your episode 2.5 years ago, I was like, all right, we got to just step our game up. And so we had like individual cameras for each person, and I had like a DOP here, and we changed our lighting, and all that stuff stuck.
Yeah.
And the later iteration was this studio. So, just want to thank you for that.
No worries. No worries.
And it was a really epic conversation we had, and talked about so many things. So, it's been good to see kind of what we were like, back then.
Yeah. I can't believe it's been so long.
Right?
It's crazy.
At the time, I remember we spoke afterwards, and you were like, you were in conversations with the UFC to become a commentator, but it hadn't happened. We were talking about your hiatus from fighting at the time. You were coming off of 2 wins. There was, the Wolf Parkinson-White syndrome that had been noted with your heart, but you were like, you know what, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. I think you had probably come back from Peru maybe 6 months or a year earlier. And that's kind of what was going on with you then. Now I see you, doing after-fight interviews for every UFC fight in Europe, Middle East, Africa. You're doing commentary on BT Sport. You made quite a transition. What's been going on with you?
Well, you summed it up pretty well. I mean, everything's been going on. God, it's hard to think what's happened since the last time I was here. But yeah, I mean, the commentary job's been the main thing. It's been completely, all-consuming. It's taken over every area of my life, because I'm having to watch so many more fights now than I used to. But I love it. It's great being around fight week and hanging out with the fighters and seeing how their weight cuts going and chatting to their coaches. And because obviously when you're fighting yourself, you're kind of in a little bubble and you miss a lot about fight week. And I always kind of envied the people that work for the UFC, because I always thought to myself, God, it must be nice just to kind of come and hang out in a nice hotel and, eat whatever you like and just hang out and, be a part of it, but not have to do all the sacrificing and stuff. But, I mean, pros and cons. I miss being there as a fighter as well. But if I'm not there as a fighter, then to be there to commentate is really, really cool.
Because it is kind of the greatest show on earth. And like, I was watching Vegas this last week, and it was just like, there's so much going on.
Yeah.
There's the story, and then I don't know what it's like on the ground. There must be the backstory. And did you see him? And he looks pretty thin. And the press conference, this was said. And then the weigh-in, someone looked like this. And there's endless drama and excitement, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously, it's a bit more intensified in Vegas, but then again, the volume's turned up exponentially because there are so many more people there. There are so many more cameras there. Everyone's got a camera in their pocket now. So there's a story being built around Fight Week all the time. Whereas when we do a show, say at the O2 Arena in February, it's going to be far more contained because all the fights will be in one hotel and there won't be as much kind of wandering around and shenanigans, as there is in Vegas. So the Vegas shows are a real big event. I mean, being there for International Fight Weeks, like nothing you've ever seen. 300,000 UFC fans all up and down the strip.
That many?
It's amazing. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And when the Irish come in, it's just completely out of control.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. That show still, the first Dublin show when Conor fought Brandao in the main event. I mean, there were only 7,000 fans there. I say only 7,000 fans, but I've been in arenas where you've got 20. I've been in arenas where you've got 50,000 fans. There's not even a comparison. I got absolutely soaked in beer and Guinness. All night and all the next day, it was just celebrations and singing, and it's a pretty special place.
I want to get to Conor because we'll definitely get your thoughts on that. Commentating, when you're talking about knowing all the things going on in the background, do you weave that into your commentary? Like, I noticed this, or I spoke to this trainer, or because when you're commentating on the fights, there's obviously 15 minutes if it goes 3 rounds where you need to add commentary, what's happening, but also a little backstory in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's important, and I think that John Gooden does a good job contributing to that as well. I mean, he really spends a lot of time sitting down with fighters during fight week and talking through their training camp, what they've been doing, and influencers and assistances that I've had during the training camp, which are always really interesting. If someone's brought in a new training partner, like Alexander Gustafsson brought in Jimmy Manoa to help him train, and that for me is just a fascinating little piece of the puzzle. And John's really good at finding those pieces, and I do as well. I mean, it's interesting because I think we work well as a team. We have different accesses to fighters. Like, fighters look at him much more as that he's the UFC employee, the one that conducts the interviews, and I do all my, this is the presentation of my training camp for you. Whereas for me, because I've been a fighter, and because a lot of the fighters in the UFC now were, aiming for the UFC when I was fighting, I get the much more kind of, fighter to fighter conversation. So I get the, oh yeah, this has been kind of bugging me, but I've been working around it, and this guy's helped me with this. So there are different elements that John and I bring to the table, and I think mine is much more of a, being in there on the mat and being treated and spoken to like a fighter. And I think that's a really interesting part of the commentary. I think that we need to address every area of the game and of each fighter's training camp.
I've been very impressed with John. I didn't know about him before. I didn't know he had the Cage Warrior background. So when he sprung up, I kind of honestly was like, who is this guy? And then what does he know about fighting? But he's very on point. Yeah. And you guys do make a great team because he doesn't claim to be a fighter. And, so he does his thing, you do your thing. And you guys seem to work really well together.
Yeah, I ever since the first day we met, we clicked, we did a screen test, and it just worked immediately. I have a lot of respect for him and the work that he's done on other organizations' shows. And because he was working, for Cage Warriors and things like that, he saw the rise of Conor McGregor as he was coming up. So, John was commentating on his world title fight. So that's a really interesting element to add into our commentary, because we're working a lot with European fighters. And John's got much more of a European-based knowledge of mixed martial arts, whereas mine's much more of an international, but more North America-based. I'm more familiar with the fighters in the gyms there because I've been living there.
Right. You lived in Vegas for how long?
3 years.
Okay. Yeah, that adds a nice reference point for you, right? So you can kind of access that if you need to. Yeah. There's no rule book for fighters becoming commentators. I think of Brian Stan, Florian, of course, but like when you decide, okay, now I'm going to be the commentator, like how did you decide how you wanted to be?
I just obviously Joe Rogan's he set the bar very high, and Joe does a really good job. There are elements that I've looked at Joe Rogan and I've thought there are certain things about his commentary style that I really like. Some things that just wouldn't suit me. I can't do the screaming at the top of your voice thing. That just, I get really excited, but I just don't unleash like Rogan does. And I think that he does that really well, but I don't think I could do that as well as Joe. So I think,
nor would the UK fans or the European fans necessarily want you to, because I think one thing UFC recognized is that we needed our own people over here.
Yeah, the market is definitely very different, and we're much more interested in the actual the technical aspects of the fight and the backstory. And another thing that I've noticed about Europe is that we love an underdog story, and we love someone that's turned their life around, turned their career around.
Okay, more so than the States.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. In the US, this is purely from my experience, but there's always been more of a focus on this guy's the winner. This guy, look at this win streak he's put together. He's untouchable. No one can touch him. And he's like superhero. Whereas in the US, in the UK, we're much more of a, well, he lost 3-4 fights and then all of a sudden he's turned it around again. And there's, they like that story.
Right, which is why they like your story always.
Well, I think I've been well received by the European fans just because I've been quite real about it. It's sport. Sometimes you lose. I was doing breakdowns today for the Condit Lawler fight, and I was editing clips of my own fight against Condit when he knocked me out, and it is what it is. Sometimes you roll the dice and you lose, and then that's sport. And I've never really had a problem with that. And the whole bravado of no one can beat me, I never really had that because I never believed it. There was always an element of, well, there's always somebody out there that can beat me.
Right.
And I like that talk. Again, we're going back to Conor McGregor, but I like that bravado that he has. It suits him. It just didn't work for me though. I'm far more honest with myself and with everybody else for me to get kind of carried away with that type of hype.
Right. It's interesting how you said that, because you've always been pretty open about talking about that loss with Condit when you were here. You talk about it really objectively, and it's interesting. I think people really like your vibe. I think they must find you really congruent, because when you came to the UFC and started commentating, like your first show, people were like, "We love it, we love it, we love it." And I think it's because you're not trying to be someone else. You know, like you said, you're not trying to be Rogan or something. You're just noting certain things that work, and then
I mean, you know, I can look at other commentators, and I've grown up with all different kinds of commentators, from, you know, Stephen Quadros and Mauro Ranallo. You know, there are loads of different good, of course, great commentators out there that have been not even, you know, worked for the UFC, but every commentator out there does something well, and I'd be a fool not to learn from them, just like I would if I was watching fighters. You know, I'd be a fool not to watch the undercard of a UFC show, because there's going to be some champions coming through the undercard. So I could learn from that. It's the same with commentators. I think Brian Stan does a fantastic job. It's clear that he does a lot of research. He spends a lot of time talking to the fighters, and he just constructs his sentences very well. I'm a big fan of Brian's commentary as well. I like John Anik's commentary. I don't know how he speaks as quickly as he does. I struggle to keep up with him sometimes, and particularly post-fight interviews. That was something that I learned from, well, between Anik and Rogan. You watch Rogan, and there's much more of a, what's the guy that does the boxing? The old guy that always falls out with Floyd Mayweather.
Oh, yeah. I don't know his name.
Larry something?
Yeah.
I don't know.
But he's always there, like, because he's still around. But but he has a real way of drawing the fighters into him.
Yeah.
He doesn't even look at him sometimes.
Yeah.
He just says, well, Floyd, you know.
I love it. And you know, you've got, you know, 20, 30,000 people in the crowd that have just gone absolutely mental for a boxing match. And he just manages to bring the whole arena down and just focus on what the fighter's got to say, because he gives it an importance that not many other people can. And I quite like that, and I think Joe does that really well. And I would like to try and take on a bit more of that energy.
I think it's probably one of the trickiest jobs in the world, because it's almost like public speaking, because like you said, you have to try to get the attention of the 20,000 people. You have to get the attention and the respect of the fighter. I mean, Joe has a lot of people's underlying respect, and I think that's why he gets such a quality interview. I mean, he used to get all the hugs and stuff, and he used to get the Nick Diaz, you know, Joe Rogan Experience, check it out, and was it Rory McDonald chatted him out. But I think people, an outside fan wouldn't see that, but since we know, I think that allows him to get a better post-fight. But look, it's still such a new art, and it's like sometimes you see even Rogan get it wrong sometimes, or Anik get it wrong, because you never know the energy of the fight. A lot of emotions in there. Also, like, Rogan has to interview the loser too, and that's a really hard interview, but it's one everyone wants to hear as well.
The other thing as well is having somebody in your ear talking.
Right. Talk about that, because most people don't see the earpiece in the right ear. And you talked about a famous thing. I think it was Rick Story and Gunnar Nelson, and you call Gunnar Rick or Rick Gunnar. And how there's 20,000 people, you got excited fighters, and you got someone in your ear trying to give you a little direction, right?
Yeah, and depending on who's in the truck and who's talking to you, some people are quite succinct. They're to the point. They say, okay, last question, or replay now, or, you know, they can be quite to the point. Whereas other people, they just draw it out a bit, and they say, well, you know, we're going to go to the interview now, and then we'll ask him a couple of questions, and then at the same time as this person's talking to me in my ear, I'm trying to review the fight in my head and pull talking points from it, and review the fighter's career in my head and pull talking points from that, and then the division that they're in and where they could potentially be going. There's a lot going on, and then when we get a crazy situation like we had in Abu Dhabi with Yahya and Bedford, and there was a clash of heads. They both went down, and Bedford got up a little quicker and landed a couple of shots and thought he'd won the fight, and it was a no contest. And then in the middle of me interviewing them, they're trying to like get at each other again. So I'm like trying to like keep them apart at the same time. And you just, you know, sometimes you just never know what's going to happen. And that Gunnar Rick thing, honestly, it goes around in my head sometimes, and I think to myself, it's the stupidest thing. But I always feel like if other people could see my perspective in that, I mean, I know Gunnar. I chatted to him for about 40 minutes after the fight. It's not like, you know, I mean, I got his name wrong because I had someone talking in my ear and there's 100 things going on. But watching my events back and picking those things apart and improving them is, you know, it's almost the same thing as I would do with martial arts. You just got to kind of be open to reviewing your own performance, no matter what it is.
And sometimes there is a controversial decision, and it's almost like stand-up comedy is in that if you don't address the elephant in the room, then it looks like it's too slick. So sometimes I think Rogan's really good about this, where he'll be like, well, that was a controversial decision, you know, and because the audience is like booing, it's like you have to kind of address the people on TV and the audience and the fighters, and keep it real, but also keep it on topic.
Yeah, yeah, it is. You know, and we had a similar situation in Dublin when Paddy Houlihan was the main event, and Smolka submitted him, and you know, obviously the last time everybody was in that arena, Conor McGregor knocked out Brandao, and it just went up. And I think everyone was hoping for a similar kind of night. A lot of weight, a lot of stress on Paddy's shoulders, and it just didn't work out for him that night. Smolka got the finish, and immediately all the crowd were like, "Oh, that's the show over," and we didn't get the big, you know, throw your Guinness in the air cheer. And there's an element of getting the fighter to say the right thing to get the crowd back to listen to what he's got to say. You know what I mean? I mean, we don't have bad guys in the UFC generally, and no one really deserves to be booed. And I understand the energy of the fans in the arena, but at the same time, I kind of feel like if someone's given the right opportunity to speak, you know, I mean, it can turn a career around really if you say the right thing. Sometimes you'll see cornermen go. I was watching it with Arlovsky when he knocked out Bigfoot, and I can't remember where that fight was, but I feel like it may have been Brazil. But he knocked him out, double right hand, and he ran over and he climbed the octagon and he's cheering and stuff, and his cornerman runs up and he's saying, and I don't know exactly what he was saying, but you can tell he's like giving him advice like, okay, be nice, go in and see if he's okay, thank his corner team, you know, do the right things. And sometimes we just forget, you know, the atmosphere is so electric, you just kind of get caught up in the moment.
Yeah, I think there's some famous footage of Greg Jackson saying to Jones, or maybe Arlovsky, it says, go get some fans, or something like that. And like, he got heat for it. But yeah, there's a lot going on there. I never thought about it, that it can make or break someone's career the way they come off there. So many challenges have been thrown out. You know, the old Chael Sonnen where he just cut Rogan off and say, you know, blah, 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 blah. There's Conor jumping over fences. I mean, there's a lot happens there. Luckily, it doesn't feel as scripted as sometimes when they bring the person in the cage. I know GSP used to hate the fact that, like, they'd bring someone in the cage right after he, you know, just defended his belt, and now that was all going on again. But
they did it when I was lined up to fight him. I beat Swick, and they brought GSP in, and even he looked uncomfortable. He was like, you know, I don't really want to be here. And then when I was chatting to him a couple of years later, he said, yeah, I didn't, you know, you just won and you were in Manchester. I didn't want to be a part of it. I wanted you to kind of, you know, have your moment. So, yeah.
How do you remember your relationship with GSP? How do you remember your fight with him? I know you went and trained with him later. You know, when you saw him walk away from the sport, I think you talked about this in the episode here 2.5 years ago. I think you said, I hope he walks out on a win. And I think you even said, I think he's only got a few fights left in him, which is really pretty amazing because I didn't see that coming. Yeah, how do you think of him?
You know, I have nothing but good things to say about George. I mean, the fight itself was one of the toughest tests of my life. You know, I spent 25 minutes fighting somebody off, and I didn't take a great deal of damage, but I was always on the back foot. I never mounted any kind of offensive, and that in 25 minutes is annoying for me, but impressive, in my opinion, for George to be able to take somebody completely out of their game. But I didn't really know what kind of person he was when I fought him. And obviously we had a few moments after the fight where he asked me if my arm was made of rubber and all that.
Which arm was it?
The armbar was this one, and the Kimura was this one, I think.
Okay. It's funny, you did grab your right arm right when you said something like that. But it was the Kimura. Okay, so armbar there at Kimura. But you kept cranking that Kimura, right?
He did, yeah.
Okay.
The Kimura was the closest. I could feel the pressure in my shoulder for that one, but the armbar, I just managed to keep my arm slightly bent all the time and kept it moving.
But I've been in Kimuras, and it's a pain that's not a very nice pain. It's something very primal that tells that reptile brain that we got a real problem here. You better slowly back up, get it out of the vine. You know, do you ever think about that pain and how you were able not to succumb to it?
Not really. No, it's not. I don't see it as particularly unusual. I think if you want something enough, it doesn't really matter what's in your way. And more than anything in that fight, I was just driven to show that I wasn't going to quit. You know, I had so many people count me out. I think I was one of the biggest underdogs in a UFC title fight that there ever has been. Wow. You know, I think I was like plus 900 on the day or something. But I've said it before and I'll say it again, the fight went exactly how it was supposed to. It couldn't have been any better, because if I'd have knocked him out, I would have been in the Matt Serra category and I would have never been considered a real champion, which makes me sad because Matt Serra made the most of a situation that he'd created for himself and won the world title. And that's the way it goes in this sport sometimes. But there was a concern that, you know, if I was going to win the fight, I was going to knock him out. If I was going to knock him out, it was going to be probably a left hook that I caught as a counter, which then would have become the lucky punch, which then would have meant that I would have fought him straight away in a rematch and probably got out wrestled like I did in the first one, you know? Whereas if I'd have been armbarred in the first round, like people had predicted, that was what we expected, so we don't need to think about that anymore.
That's a fascinating way of looking at that fight. Well, a lot of guys, you know, you look at that old school bitter boxer that we all know in the movies, he'd be like, oh yeah, that night, I never got my fair shake, it could have changed my life. But with you, you're like, it was a fight outcome that would have happened, maybe, anyways.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was the right thing for that night.
And so you talked to Georgia later and he was like, you got an arm of rubber, and you started a relationship with him after that?
Yeah. Well, at the time, not really, no. I mean, I didn't speak to him for a couple of years after the fight. And I think it was Faraz that reached out to me and asked me if I would come up and help him train.
His trainer at TriStar Gym, okay.
Yeah. They were preparing for Condit, and then I helped him with the Diaz preparation as well. But it was great being up there. I mean, they flew me up there for a week, and I really didn't know what to expect. I thought, you know, maybe there's some demons that they need to exercise. GSP's just going to armbar me all day for the first 10 and they'll send me home or something like that. But they were great. I was involved in all their training sessions, and even when I wasn't a part of the training session, I was watching. I mean, there were some sessions that he was working with, you know, it's like his strength and conditioning sessions and stuff, and I would kind of stay out and watch. But it was fascinating to be a part of a world champions training camp, and especially for GSP as well. You know, of all the champions that we've had in the sport, I don't think there's been many that have approached the sport as professionally as George has. You know, and the whole kind of the movement towards movement that we're seeing now across fitness generally, but specifically for mixed martial arts. You know, George was already doing gymnastics and all that kind of stuff.
I remember him doing gymnastics and kind of doing these things that you wouldn't necessarily think applied to MMA.
Yeah.
And you said last time that he was very linear, and I guess I would throw in, it seems like methodical and maybe even obsessive about every aspect of his training, right?
Yeah. He was very, very single-minded. That was another thing that I noticed when I was up there training with him, was that the only people that are around him on a daily basis are his coaches and his training partners. You know, he lives on his own, and he's just entirely focused on the sport. And the good thing as well is, I mean, you know, when I was living in Nottingham, it was I got a certain sense of what it would be like. But for George in Montreal, everywhere he goes, everyone knows who he is, and everyone that knows who he is wants to talk to him about his fights. So there's not a moment in the day where he steps away from the sport. You know, and I guarantee you, knowing the type of person that George is, he won't think about the sport any more than when he's on his own. When he's on his own, he will be thinking about the fight every minute of the day.
And that is unsustainable.
Yeah, it's exhausting. It really is exhausting. You know, I mean, I've got other interests, and it was something that I always remember reading in a book, the Book of the Samurai. And it was a quote about balance, and it was talking about the fact that a warrior has to be an artist and a musician and a poet, and, you know, all these other things as well. Because if you're not, then you can be entirely consumed with one thing, and that's, like you said, it's not sustainable. And I think it just kind of consumed George. It became too heavy to carry.
And so that didn't surprise you when he walked away?
No, not at all. Not at all. Particularly the landscape of the division at the time.
And I think he had some obviously underlying issues, which I don't think he thought drug testing was where it was. But at the same time, the way he would talk about it is that, he was so singularly obsessed and focused with his current opponent. And then as soon as that belt was wrapped around his waist again, the next guy would be there. And it's probably already exhausting being the champion anyways, but being the champion as GSP, where that's just, he even admitted he was obsessive.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
He looks very relaxed. I've never seen him smile so much when he's taking the break. Do you think GSP will be back?
You know, I don't know now. If you'd have asked me a year ago, I'd have said yes. But now I don't think so. And I'm not sad about that. I'm a fan of GSP like I am of Anderson Silva and of Jose Aldo and of all the greats, but with Aldo, I want to see him have another fight. Anderson Silva, I'm not so bothered about. GSP, I don't need to see him fight again. I think we've seen the best GSP that we're going to see. I think if he comes back now, it's going to be a bit forced. I think it's going to be because people expect him to come back, not because he has a drive to. I mean, from what I've seen, he's still in the gym a lot, and he's giving a lot of input to new up-and-coming fighters. I mean, we had for the Dublin card, we had a bunch of fighters over there. A bunch of the British fighters went out there to train with him for a while, and Joe Duffy spent a lot of time at TriStar, and I think that he's finding a place now within the sport, where he's not expected to be competing all the time. We'll always look at him as a champion. He'll always be a champion.
But training in the gym and training as the champion are completely different levels, right?
Yeah. Well, just training generally. Training without a fight to train for is entirely different to having a focus for your training. And I miss not having a focus, but at the same time, I've come to enjoy the daily process of wake up and what do I feel like doing today? What wasn't working yesterday in the gym and how can I make that better today? Whereas when you're in training camp, you don't always have that freedom. So although he's further away from combat than he ever has been, he's probably closer to martial arts than he has been in a long time. And that's probably what's keeping him motivated to be in the gym, because he's back learning again, and there's no rush, there's no pressure.
Yeah, I agree. I would be okay to see him fight again, but I don't need to see him fight. I feel like he did so much and he was just himself as an entity. I'm not one of the people that just wants to ask him all the time when he's coming back. It doesn't feel like he is. And also he's been out, year and a half now? It just seems like we wouldn't get the George we knew back again. And then why are we doing it? And it's amazing how time moves on, doesn't it? And the division rolls on.
Yeah.
And it's funny how you say that, because you've probably become a better martial artist through your analysis. And even when you were here last time, you said, Brian, when I take a step back and you're not training for the immediacy of the fight, you can fall in love with martial arts again. So I guess I have to ask you. So are you a better martial artist? And if you then again try to come back, would that change that?
Yes, I am a better martial artist, but in the last 3 years, I've spent less time training martial arts than I have done for my whole life. And I mean, partly because I've had other focuses. I've been obviously training for the boat race, but I've been spending so much time sitting watching fights, and it was something my boxing coach in Vegas, Jimmy Gifford, he said to me, because when he first came out to Vegas, he was brought out by Dana to be Dana's boxing coach.
And so he was going to fight Tito Ortiz?
Exactly, that was exactly what. So when he came out, they put him in a hotel, they gave him the back catalogue of the UFC, and they said, there you go, educate yourself about mixed martial arts. And he was an old school boxing coach. He'd been cornering professional fighters since he was 13. And he just completely threw himself into the sport and learnt about mixed martial arts through watching fights just over and over again. And he said to me when I took on the commentary job, he said, you're going to be surprised in a year's time how much more you know about the sport. And he's right. I'm seeing things that I'd never seen before. I've taken myself out of the equation. Right. See, when I was in training camp, it was always me against whoever I was fighting. So say I'm fighting Carlos Condit. So I would watch Carlos Condit from my perspective, and then I would go back through my fights and I'd watch my fights from Carlos Condit's perspective. So I'm effectively stepping into his skill set and looking at myself so I can see where the holes in my game are that he can exploit. And that was always my approach when I was fighting a guy. The problem with that is that I'm only ever getting one additional skill set to look at, because I'm always seeing my own perspective as well as theirs. But now if I'm breaking down Condit versus Lawler, I watch Condit from Lawler's perspective and Lawler from Condit's perspective. And I'll even spend time, I'll head back to the hotel tonight and I'll be in the gym till midnight, and I'll be shadowboxing as if I'm both of those fighters so I can feel their styles. And then when I watch the fight, I'll be knowing what to expect from both fighters. And I've always done it throughout my own career, but I've never applied it to a fight separately, separate from myself. And it's unbelievable what I'm learning from it.
So it's almost like you've been training your whole life to be this super analyst, right?
Yeah, it's crazy.
Did you
I've got
know how?
goosebumps just thinking about it. It's weird.
Did you know how good you would be at it, or how much you would love it?
No, and I still don't think I'm showing what I'm capable of. I mean, these videos that we're doing, we've been doing the breakdowns for Unibet, and we've also done a show called UFC Breakdown. We're so limited by time that this is something that I would like to almost kind of do independently of the UFC as well, is to start producing a bit more content like fight reviews or fight breakdowns, but just some kind of audio piece maybe. But there's so much going on in these fights, and I just can't communicate it in the short breakdowns that we do.
Yeah, the problem with television, obviously, is it's for usually short attention spans, a very general audience. But I was watching your fight breakdown of Conor McGregor, which we'll get into, but I didn't notice so many things about Conor until I saw your breakdown of him. And a lot of the things that you were saying, he's doing these tells and that uppercut and then that big kind of overhand left that he throws when the fighter's actually moving away from him. And like all of these things that I hadn't actually given Conor that much credit for, some of the real technical things. And he's always saying that I see sequences and stuff. And I was like, wow. After I saw your breakdown, I was like, maybe he does see sequences. But yeah, I think there's a real need for that. But that doesn't exist in America, that kind of a detailed analysis. Is that something that you think the Europeans like more?
I don't think it exists generally for the sport of mixed martial arts. I think it's an area that other sports are really pioneering. I mean, the name I hear all the time is Gary Neville. He does. I'm not a football fan, but he basically does a similar job to me, but with football. And I think football shows, obviously, with it being such a huge market in the UK, we've always had football analysis shows, and I think that. I think that mixed martial arts, we're still catching up with that. We're still getting to the stage where, we're still coming out of the instructionals phase. We're still coming out of the bit where people understand what recovering your guard is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, we've got a bit of time before we get into the analysis phase of the sport, but I feel like I have a strong role in that, and I feel like I can help that along. And we have different people do it in different ways. Robin Black is the other one that I hear a lot about. And I don't know a great deal about Robin Black. I understand he was some kind of glam rocker back in the day.
Okay. But I've seen his stuff in America. Yeah.
I mean, and they're not. It's not my kind of breakdown. I respect his knowledge. I think he does have an eye for the sport, definitely. But that kind of it's much more of an American presentation. It's he talks about flim flam and all this kind of stuff, and it's like his face is red as he's talking about it, and it's quite intense. And certainly from my experience in Europe, when that happens, somebody kind of goes, oh, it's a bit too much. We're a little more reserved in Europe, and I think that we would rather be spoken to than screamed at. And I think that particularly for analysis, you can't scream your way through an analysis. I feel like I'm telling a story. I'm explaining what's happening, and I've been training for 20-something years, and I see things that maybe other people don't. And if I can communicate that, then that's going to help knowledge of the sport grow. That's going to help awareness of the sport grow, and maybe this is my role of helping that along.
Can you explain the difference between the American fans and the UK fans? I mean, we've touched upon it a few times, and you've lived in the US, you fought in US fights, and now you're here, you're commentating here. I mean, in general, how would you explain how those two audiences like to consume their media and then project it?
In the US, they're far more extroverted, and obviously this is a generalization. Obviously, it doesn't work across the board. I know a lot of loud British people, but as a generalization, and this is a good example, is if I'm walking down the street in the US and someone recognizes me, even if they're across the street or in their car driving by, they'll go, hey, Hardy, outlaw, or something like that. Whereas I can be sat next to somebody on the tube in London and they know who I am and they won't say anything, but they'll nudge their friend and they'll show a photo of me on their phone. They'll be like, this guy's saying, you know what I mean? It's weird. It's kind of like, I wouldn't say I get recognized anymore in any particular place, but I'm spoken to a lot more in the US. People come up to me and speak to me, and it happens a little more in London. But in Nottingham, I can feel when I'm being stared at, Right. Or like there was a time when I was in a supermarket doing my shopping, and I'm a 1-2 o'clock in the morning kind of shopper. I like quiet. I like peace and quiet. And I had a guy just took a photograph of me from behind, and didn't say anything. And then an hour later, when I got home and I've unpacked my shopping, I'm going through Twitter, and he took a photo of me. He's like, "Oh, saw Dan Hardy in the supermarket." It's like, well, why didn't you speak to me? So that's a bit strange. That's the biggest difference for me. But for I mean, I think European markets are becoming far more Americanized. I think people have become very attached to the Joe Rogan, Mike Goldberg type of commentary, and I think that there has been a little bit of resistance to me and John because of that, because we do have a different style. But at the same time, you know, different areas of the world do have different styles for things. You know, if you watch the Road to Japan that they did for the Roy Nelson, Josh Barnett card that they did over there, it had a very Japanese feel to it, and I like that. You know, it gets boring if it's all the same.
Yeah, I felt like the UFC made a conscious decision to bring you guys in and to stop flying Goldberg and Rogan in here for all those shows, and I think it's a smart, great long-term business decision to just to recognize and then give credit to the Europeans and European fans that they need something a little different.
Yeah.
It's also tricky because Europe's big, you know, and it's you got Abu Dhabi to Germany to Sweden to the UK to Ireland. Those are some pretty different fans.
Yeah.
So you have to, really you have to kind of cross a lot of borders there.
Yeah, but the easiest thing is everyone loves fighting. Everyone loves the UFC, you know, and no matter where I go, and no matter what language I'm communicating in, because I don't speak any other languages, but wherever I go, I'm meeting people that have got different backgrounds and different different lifestyles and upbringings. But we all love MMA. We all love mixed martial arts, so we can always have something to talk about. You know, I've had great conversations with fans all across the world because that one common thing is, that card that's coming up, the next UFC card, it's amazing.
Yeah.
You know.
Are you going to fight again?
I think this is the question I get more than any other. Yeah, I am. I am. I mean, it's a weird situation because there's been no progress since the last time I was here. I'll be honest. I've not done any more tests or anything like that. I went and had a medical done for the boat race because I had to get cleared for that, and I was cleared, no problem. But I've been so absolutely consumed with commentary and with doing the analysis stuff. And working as a UFC ambassador as well. They do have me, flying to different places and stuff regularly. So I've just been so busy. I've not had a chance to put, a good 5-6 week training camp together to get my conditioning back up to where I would like it. But I did sail from London to Rio, I mean, if I can do 28 days crossing the Atlantic, pretty sure I could do 15 minutes in the octagon.
To watch the rest of this fascinating interview, click on the link below and go to LondonRealAcademy.com. There you can sign in with your social media login and watch the rest of the episode for free, along with all of our episodes on London Real, my webinars, and all of our premium content, all located over at LondonRealAcademy.com. So click on the link below, you'll be directed there, and you can watch the rest of this fascinating interview, and I'll see you there.
I didn't really have anything else. I didn't really know myself as anything other than an athlete. And